American journalists about the scandal. And they said to me, well, compared to the scandals we have in the United States, how do you think these things are serious? And I said to them, it's because we have the Conflict of Interest Act. It is because we have the Lobbying Act. It is because we have Elections Canada and elections financing rules, and we expect politicians to maintain them, that we are not in a situation like the United States right now, that the rule of law and the obligation of parliamentarians to follow the rule of law has to maintain a primary principle. So we've had a number of scandals under this government. Mr. Greywall Scandal, I wrote to the Ethics Commissioner about that scandal. Now that has gone on to the RCMP. But the initial issues with the Greywall Scandal was him using his position as a member of Parliament to further financial interests of friends, and that was in the notorious India scandal. But we've had Mr. Morneau, the finance minister, quit in the midst of an unprecedented economic crisis because his complete failure to even read the Conflict of Interest Act and to know he'd been put in a position of conflict in his dealings with the We Charity. Absolutely unacceptable. We have the Prime Minister, who's now under his third investigation. And really, the question that is at the heart of the We scandal is, how was it possible that a group who had built such close ties with all the key Liberals in power were able to come when they were in the midst of their own financial crisis and get upwards of $500 million because of who they knew. We should not be running government like this. And in the midst of an unprecedented pandemic, Canadians need to be assured that government is putting their interests first and not their interests of their friends. I think of the people of Saskatchewan that I represent in my riding who've been waiting for years for the government to sign off on basic things like a road so they could begin to move a new community. A community that this year had to live out in tents on the land in April because of COVID, because they couldn't be evacuated and they had no safe place to go. And when they heard about the We scandal, they said to me, how is it possible that these guys could get $500 million so easily, and we have to fight and beg to get the government to recognize even the most basic changes in our communities? And that's the principle that we have to keep first and foremost when we're talking about conflict of interest. It's about the role of powerful insiders who should not have that access. I am certainly looking forward to the return of our committees. The Finance Committee was doing excellent work on the We scandal. We need answers. Official languages will be looking at the We scandal because of the fact that this was a group completely unprepared to present their program in Quebec, and I think let alone the rest of the country. Ethics has certainly raised a number of questions about the relationships between key government ministers and the Kielburger brothers. We also have just had a finding of guilt against Liberal insider David McNaughton after I raised a question to the Ethics Commissioner about the former ambassador's work on behalf of Palantir. I think this is a huge issue, my friends, because Palantir is a deeply problematic surveillance company. This is a company run by billionaire tech giant Peter Thiel, who's, I think, has some very extreme right views and very questionable views on democracy. This is a technology that's been used to target migrant families, and we know the horrific abuses that are taking place in the detention centers. We know that Palantir honed its technologies in Iraq. It's been tied to the CIA and the FBI. This is a company that I don't think can say they have Canadian values. And yet, because they hired a top Liberal insider, they got an all-access pass to everybody. To Rick Tice, the Prime Minister's confidant, to the Deputy Prime Minister, to the Minister of Innovation, to the Chief of Defense Staff. How is it possible that a company like Palantir could get this kind of inside access just because they hired a top Liberal. I'm certainly looking forward to having that discussion at Ethics, and I'm hoping my colleagues in the bloc, the Liberals and Conservatives, will support me in making sure that Mr. McNaughton does come and explain how he got this kind of access. So these issues of ethics and accountability are vitally important. But I think we also need to remember, my friends, that this discussion this morning is happening in the midst of a massive crisis that's facing us right now. And the fact that the Prime Minister prorogued Parliament to escape accountability on the WE scandal is something that we need to be investigating, because the reason we have an urgency this morning is because the Prime Minister did not let Parliament sit when it should have been sitting, and the CERB benefits are ending, and people are facing deep financial crisis right now. But our obligation at the end of the day is to make sure that we are there and rising up to meet the issues of the pandemic, because this second wave looks like it might be even outpacing the first wave very quickly. So in terms of what the CERB and the cutoff to CERB means, we know that the Prime Minister and the Liberal government before were looking to jail people who had were not eligible for getting CERB. They promised money for disabilities, and they never delivered it. Their last trial balloon was the fact that they were going to cut, when they modified CERB into its new form, from $2,000 a month to $1,600 a month. And what would that mean for people who have lost their work, who have no work to go back to? Well, just the other day, I spoke with a woman who just moved from Alberta to Ontario. She set herself up in a practice as a naturopath. She had taken on huge amounts of student debt. She set the practice up. She was going to be a self-employed businesswoman, and COVID hit, and she's had no ability to practice her work. $1,600 a month will be economically devastating. $2,000 a month through the winter will get her through to the other side. That's the focus right now, my friends. I was speaking with a woman who spent years as a self-employed broker, helping with tourism and tour plans for people. Well, there is no tourism going on. Without this money, she is economically destitute. So our priority right now has to be getting things fixed, being able to answer for the crisis that we're in. So as much as I enjoy and think it's really important that we get to talk about Liberal conflict of interest, I believe our priority this morning is to get back on the issue of dealing with the crisis in the pandemic, start showing Canadians that we can work together in this Parliament to deal with issues of people who have to take time off work because they're sick without being economically devastated, to make sure that the CERB gets through. It's about getting people through to the other side of this winter. This is going to be a hard winter, and we have to be there for them. As for the ethics violations, I think our committee is going to be very, very busy in the coming months, but we still have other issues as well. So I'm very pleased to participate in this. I thank my colleagues in the Conservative Party for bringing this motion forward. It is a good motion. It is worthy of study, but we do need today to get these measures passed so that people can get some economic security at this time, and they're looking for us to do this. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, my friends.
The honourable member for Peace River Westlock.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my colleague for his speech. I thank him for coming to us over the virtual Parliament. I was just wondering if he had what his thoughts were on the prorogation. The timing of that, to me, seemed interesting, and the fact that it was for 6 weeks. They could have, if they were so adamant about a new throne speech, they could have prorogued overnight, essentially. And so I'm just wondering his thoughts on that. Thanks.
The honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Well, I thank my honourable colleague for that question. It's an excellent question, because the issue with prorogation is it happened just as the government did its massive document dump on the WE scandal, on which they had blacked out many of the pages. But the pages that they hadn't blacked out raised some seriously troubling issues. For example, the secret meeting between the youth minister on April 17th and Craig Kielburger. That meeting really set the tone for giving the Kielburger group the inside track. What we also saw in those documents, which I think is really staggeringly unacceptable, was that in their promotion to key ministers and to key departments, the Kielburgers included photos of the Prime Minister's family, his mother and his wife, to show how close they were. And this put the Prime Minister in a serious conflict of interest. The Prime Minister has an obligation under the Conflict of Interest Act to have his personal affairs in order so that he's not in a conflict. And the fact that we saw in the documents they were using pictures of the family to promote is very troubling. So we were not able to ask those questions when we should have. And that prorogation has actually affected people economically. So it was not right.
The Honourable Member for Laurentides-de-la-Belle. La Pointe-Belle-Île, Madam Speaker. My apologies. Laurentides-de-la-Belle, virtually. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a question for my colleague. Given that we have spent part of the summer trying to cast a light on the We Charity affair, we've also noted that people simply no longer have any trust. As you mentioned, you've been here, well, the Honourable Member has been here for 16 years. I've just arrived. So what could we do to improve people's trust, but also stopping the pure hemorrhage of lack of ethics and conflict of interests?
C'est une bonne question.
That is a good question. It's essential for the Canadian Parliament to implement measures that allows us to guarantee respect for our statutes, for all government, for all MPs. We all have to respect the Conflict of Interest Code. But clearly, there's a pattern with the Prime Minister and with the Liberals. They ignore this. I think Parliament must start a new investigation on the role of conflict of interest to make sure that there are strict penalties so that everyone respects this act on conflict of interest, especially the Prime Minister and the Cabinet.
The Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'm wondering if my colleague can provide his thoughts in terms of why it's so important that not only the national government, but governments across the board look at ways in which we can support Canadians. The legislation in which his leader is seconded reinforces just how important the role is for government to be there in that real, tangible way for Canadians because of loss of income and the need to be able to survive.
Our member for Timmins, James Bay, has about a minute to respond.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. It's essential. We saw COVID upended so many of our myths about our national economy. Within 2 weeks of the shutdown, people didn't have enough money to pay their rent. And to get through what will be a very hard winter, the federal government has the tools. The federal government has the powers to play a huge role working with the provinces. We need to say to Canadians, we will get you through to the other side. And that other side has to be a better Canada. We're going to spend unprecedented amounts of money. It needs scrutiny. It needs to make sure that it's going in the right places. But we need to be there, and we need to show that we can work together at this time, because this is a crisis that's been unlike anything we've ever seen since the Second World War or the Depression. So I'm encouraging my colleagues that we can work together and do this.
Reprise de débat, resuming debate. Resuming debate, the honourable member for Malpeque.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I will admit I was a little late getting to the House this morning, and I've now reviewed the motion, and I really have to say, why now? Why today? You know, I remember making a speech in the. Sitting just past, the one that was prorogued, and I know there's opposition to that, and that's fine. That can happen in a democracy. But I remember saying, you know, that Canadians have put in place a minority parliament, and we should take the opportunity as parliamentarians to show we can make this parliament work. And when errors happen, there's errors all around. I'm not saying the government is errorless, because they're not. But really, if you're a Canadian sitting out there today, watching this Parliament right now, do you think they're proud of us? Do you really think they are? I don't think they are. You know, I've had the opportunity as Canada-US chair to go to the US many times, and I have seen the situation down there where it is so partisan. The Democrats are here and the Republicans are there, and never shall the two meet. And I've always said I'm so proud of us as Canadians that we haven't let that happen. But this motion is telling me that that is happening. Yes, this issue needs to be debated. This motion, there's nothing wrong with this motion, but today is not the day, folks. It just isn't. Canadians are concerned about the COVID pandemic out there. Businesses are concerned about where they sit. I spent this morning, half an hour this morning, on the phone with one of the food processors in this country. And they're concerned where they're at. They believe the government is still continuing to move ahead with new regulations, which I personally would oppose, on front of packaging labeling. Now's not the time for that either. And they're making suggestions that in other countries, some of the tax measures they're bringing in are important and is making them non-competitive here. That's one of our main industries. We should be debating issues like that, not this one today. There will be a time and place. That's why we've got separate committees. These issues should be at least before a committee first, the ethics committee, or some other. There is limited time to have a debate on Bill C2, C4, and I think we've seen a slice of where this Parliament can work. The parties came together, the government side came together with the leader of the NDP and made changes that I do think improve the assistance to individuals and for improved sick leave. That's fine. We should debate that issue. Several people in this House were on the Finance Committee, in which we held hearings between just after Parliament shut down due to COVID and I think late May. And we heard from some 300 witnesses, and we heard a lot of concerns. Where are they going to be as we go through this pandemic? Those are some of the issues that we should be talking about. So what I'm suggesting to people here is, look, can we, for the next couple of months or whatever, can we concentrate on the issues that Canadians are concerned about? This is political theatre in terms of this motion. And look, I've been in opposition, and I've played these kind of games. There's no question about that. I admit that. But we are in a pandemic. Members of Parliament, we're in a pandemic. And we need to deal with the issue that is before us. So my request basically is to parliamentarians here, let's deal with the issue Canadians want us to deal with specifically for the next 6 weeks or so. Let's let our committees deal with some of these issues, whether it's the WE scandal. Yes, there needs to be more work done on that. We've had hearings at the Finance Committee. We've now went through the documents, and I know that issue is going to continue to come up. But today, in this House, is not the place for that to occur, Madam Speaker. You know, the tourism industry in my area is very gravely concerned about where they find themselves. The airline and transportation industry is very gravely concerned about where they find themselves. 94%. The airports in my region are 94% down in business. What are we as parliamentarians going to propose to those industries so that they can survive till next season? And what the tourism and hospitality industry is telling me now is where they figured 2021 would be the rebound year. They're now looking at it as the transition year. And hopefully 2022 will be the rebound year. We need to look at what can we do to strengthen our economy. You know, the debate on C2 and C4 is going to be assistance to individuals. And yes, that assistance has to be there. But what are we going to do beyond that to strengthen our businesses so that they can be there and be the backbone of our economy in the future? Those are some of the things that we need to be talking about. You know, the other thing that we heard, or I've heard over the summer more so, not so much at Finance Committee, is, are the chartered banks pulling their weight? You know, right now the bank deferrals are starting to come due. And I've been talking to some in the business industry who are saying they're having a rough ride with the banks in terms of rolling over their operating capital and their loans. Well, this government, or not only this government, Canadian taxpayers have basically backed the big banks, Business Development Corporation, Export Development Corporation, Farm Credit Corporation with additional liquidity. So to basically give them a guarantee as they provide monies during this pandemic. And I have to ask this place, and I ask directly to the banks, I don't believe they're pulling their full weight in getting us out of this pandemic. Those are some of the issues, Madam Speaker, that we need to be talking about. We've heard over the summer a lot of talk from a lot of people on a guaranteed annual income, and that's an issue that we should be discussing. Personally, I don't think we can go holus bolus, but I wouldn't mind seeing a pilot project, a few of them across the country, to see what it means. Would that be able to replace some of the other programs that we've had to quickly bring in as a result of the pandemic? Those issues we need to be discussing, and I want to turn to where I really come from, Madam Speaker, is the farm community. I'm hearing a lot of concern from the farm community about the safety nets that are in place for them at the moment. And I strongly believe that the business risk management program must be improved. I could go through a litany of things and blame the previous government on that, because they did cut back the business risk management from 85% to 70%. But let's get it back up there again, and let's work together to get it up there. I know the member said I just did. Yeah, I guess I did. But I could go through, Madam Speaker, I could go through a heck of a lot more of issues that the previous government had done that really isn't helpful to us today. But I'll not bother doing that, because I really believe that we have to find a way to work together, especially in the short term. So let me sum up my thoughts, Madam Speaker. How much time do I have left? 25 seconds. I'm not going to be able to sum up a heck of a lot in 25 seconds, but let me just say, look, when we all stand in this place in this kind of a debate, what are Canadians thinking of their Parliament, and are they thinking we're doing what they see as a priority? And this motion is not, I believe, what they see as a priority. Let's get on to putting in place the programs, and then we can have these kind of debates in the House, at committee, wherever. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Regina Louvain.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and it's a joy to rise and take part in this debate. And I have a quote from December 31st, 2009 I'd like to read and just get the members' feedback on this quote. It's an affront, is from the CBC article. It's an affront to the citizens of Canada and their purpose in electing members to Parliament in the last election. We have men and women fighting abroad for democracy, and we have our own Prime Minister shutting down democracy, he said. People have to understand, when you prorogue Parliament, you lose everything that was there. Committees no longer function. They're gone. How do we raise questions when the Prime Minister on the biggest deficit in Canadian history? How do we question and propose things to cut them in terms of what they're going to cut? What programs are they going to take away? This was talking about the proroguement in Parliament in 2009. And my question would be, what's the difference between that member from Malpeque in 2009 and the member standing here today?
The honourable member for Malpeque.
There's really no difference in that member then and that member now. I have made it clear that I am not in favour of prorogation. I stand by that. But I do believe the prorogation then was a little worse than it is now, in that it was to prevent a vote which could have brought down the government, and it was a much longer prorogation. But I underline this clearly. As a member of Parliament, you should, if you're going to prorogue to open another session, it should be for a very short number of days. I am not one that's in favour of prorogation.
Commentaire, l'honorable député de La Pointe-et-L'Île.
The honourable member for La Pointe-et-L'Île. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I would just like to note that our colleague across the way did not say whether he was for or against the motion. That would be good. Then, in addition, this whole argument of saying that we have more important things to debate, we're wasting time, I think that's very unfortunate. We've just been through prorogation, which delayed things. We could have done things a lot more quickly without the prorogation. Ultimately, it was just a distraction because the government was facing conflicts of interest in the wheat charity scandal. So I'd like to hear my colleagues' thoughts on that. If the government really needed a prorogation, why not just have a few days of prorogation? We would have saved a lot of time. And now we're under so much pressure to pass this bill quickly, whereas it would have been good to have more time to debate it. It's really unfortunate to see that on the Liberal side, they're simply trying to find excuses or any way to avoid discussing the ethical questions that are extremely problematic.
For Malpeque.
No, the member's main argument was it would be good to have more time to debate basically the bills that are before us. This motion right now is absolutely taking away from that time. As I said in my remarks, why today? Why now? That's political gamesmanship, and I don't believe the people in the members' riding, Madam Speaker, think this is the issue that we should be dealing about in this House. Time is important in this House, and we need to take time to get all the ideas from everyone, because there's good ideas. We've seen that at Finance Committee. There's good ideas from all parties, and that's what we need to be trying to do, to get those good ideas to strengthen our economy, to look after individuals and to look after businesses. That's what we ought to be doing.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Victoria. A brief question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I agree with a number of the points that the member raised in his speech. I think when we think about whether Canadians are proud of this Liberal government, the answer is no. When this Liberal government threatened to put people who are applying for CERB in jail or with exorbitant fines, when their own members were telling Canadians, if you're not sure you're eligible, apply anyway. And now they're seeing their own government, consecutive Liberal and Conservative governments, mired in scandals. What does the member think Canadians think of this Liberal government right now?
Honourable member for Malpeque, a brief response, please.
Madam Speaker, look, I think Canadians are very proud of what this government has done in terms of the pandemic. I think they're very proud of how quickly we acted, in which there was 10,000 applications a minute going through in order to get CERB, in which which kept food on the table and gave people the confidence of which to stay home and help us in terms of fighting the pandemic. I really, you know, I talk to a lot of constituents, I talk to a lot of Canadians, and I think they're really proud of how the government acted in the pandemic. What the member is talking about is other side issues that is not the issue of the moment.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And, you know, as I enter into this debate, it's unfortunate that once again, parliamentarians are seized with having to discuss a Liberal ethical failure. You know, I'd like to respond a little bit to some of the members opposite who seem to be so concerned that us in this House have to deal with these, the long pile, the long list, the big pile of ethical failures, when, in their words, we should be debating the things that matter to Canadians. You know, it's unfortunate that these Liberals seem so concerned about their own political aims that they would do something like prorogue Parliament when we could have been debating the very issues that they say are so important. We could have been debating them weeks ago. We offered, as the Conservatives, to come in on Sunday to debate the very legislation that they are saying that we need to spend more time on. Well, we offered that and they said no. So, Madam Speaker, I find it tragic. But this is typical in true Liberal fashion. They will be so quick to say that there's an emergency, that we need to be a part of a Team Canada approach, whatever the case is, when really they have no interest in listening to anyone other than those narrow perspectives that they decide are important. And it's unfortunate that in the process, over the past 8 months, so often this House and the perspectives of many in it have been silenced. If they were interested in the Team Canada approach, I truly believe that we could have looked at many of the programs that have helped Canadians and they would have been made better. In fact, we see something like the emergency wage subsidy. The Liberals started at a 10% subsidy, which after significant pressure, I know from members of my party, the Conservative Party, and many Canadians and business groups, it was raised to 75%. That's called a Team Canada approach. So I'm glad that there are instances of that, but we could have been doing so much more had they not sidelined Parliament. You look at the prorogation, unprecedented, using a legitimate parliamentary tool to shut down the investigations into the Prime Minister and his senior cohort's actions. Unprecedented that a Prime Minister would abuse executive authority in a manner so flagrant as that. Unbelievable. So one of my colleagues across the way used the word disappointment. Now, in his context, he said he's disappointed that we're debating Liberal ethical failures, and I'm sure he is. He'd rather be talking about anything else, I'm sure. But I'll tell you what I hear each and every day from my constituents. Disappointment in this Liberal government. Disappointment in the laundry list of ethical failures. Disappointment in the fact that there is a Prime Minister across the way that is saying that the idea of a national unity crisis is crazy, unbelievable, and a true shame for the honor that needs to be represented in this House from coast to coast to coast. You see, Madam Speaker, I find it tragic that we have a government that is so embroiled in their own scandal, so embroiled in their own political aims, that they would refuse to acknowledge, and it's not for lack of trying, I know, from every Western MP, and not just Conservative Western MPs, although we do make up the vast majority of them. Western MPs have been making it clear that there's a unity crisis. Yet that government refuses to acknowledge that it even exists. For shame, Madam Speaker. So we have before us today another Liberal ethical failure. Former Member of Parliament breaching the ethics code 10 times. 10 times. A code that was put in place to ensure that members of this place had a framework that they could ensure that their ethical conduct fit within the expectations of what Canadians believe. And one of my fellow Conservative colleagues was reflecting upon his many years in this place and said back when it was first introduced, the idea of naming and shaming was enough. It was enough, Madam Speaker, that members of this place were concerned about how they conducted themselves, were concerned about the fact that they wanted to do what was best for Canadians. Yet, when we look at the conduct of this government over the last close to 5 years, we see time and time again from the top, let alone the conduct of many others, how the absolute disregard that they show towards ethics, towards the conduct that Canadians expect us to uphold. There's disappointment, Madam Speaker, real disappointment. Real disappointment in the actions of a Liberal government that is so consumed by their own scandals, their waste and mismanagement, that it is truly distracting from their ability to do the things that Canadians expect them to do. Now, we are going to continue to debate the other important items that are before this House, and that's important. But if we do not ensure that the trust and integrity of this institution is upheld, Madam Speaker, we are in an incredibly difficult place. Because when the trust of this institution is eroded, we see significant challenges come. We see that there's a lack of trust in anything that government says, not just its political leaders, but anything that they say. When Canadians can't trust their Prime Minister when he has truly misrepresented himself in this place, and it's been found to be the case, whether regarding his Aga Khan vacation, whether the SNC Lavalin scandal, or whether the Madam Speaker, I sat on the Ethics Committee this summer, and I'll tell you, it was unbelievable. Every day there was a new development about how this government's just unbelievable conduct, an absolute embarrassment to the institutions and the places that each one of us, all 338 of us, the seats that we are temporary custodians of. It is unbelievable the erosion of trust that has been taking place. So it's important that we debate issues like this, for we have to ensure that there is a full accounting, that when somebody makes a mistake, that there is an accounting of that. And the motion that my colleague from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes has brought forward is a step to ensure that there is an accounting, that there is responsibility taken, because Canadians demand nothing less. There is a need to ensure that there is responsibility taken for the actions of this government. You see, Canadians can't trust the words of this government, and it is causing a breakdown of the trust that our society, it's truly, Madam Speaker, a societal issue, that when you cannot trust the words of your leaders, it causes a societal breakdown that is concerning beyond all belief. We need to take this issue very seriously, just like we all need to take ethics and our conduct very, very seriously. We need to work diligently to ensure that trust is brought back to the institutions of Parliament, that we demonstrate that this place matters. There is one place in this country where every square kilometer of this beautiful nation is represented, and that is on the green carpet within the walls of this chamber. We need to demonstrate to Canadians that we are all worthy of that. Now, Madam Speaker, as I see my time is close to an end, I had a conversation with constituents the other day, and I asked them to give me a report about how things are out in their communities, and I represent a large rural riding with many communities. And I asked them to give me a brief report about how things are going and how they feel government is. And time again, as I listened on this Zoom call, to person after person, there was about 20 of them. The words that I heard most were that they're tired of the scandal, the waste, and the mismanagement of this government, and that they are looking forward to a day when there is something called good governance brought back to this country, governance that Canadians can trust. So, Madam Speaker, I am proud to support this motion brought forward from my colleague and look forward to answering questions in that regard so that we can bring trust back to the hallowed halls of this Parliament. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Fleetwood Kills.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. That's a very good harumphing across the way there from the new member. Very well done. I'm wondering, given that, we burned up this much time, instead of talking about the things that are truly right there in front of Canadians as important to them, if he would be willing to then expand upon his colleague's motion and deal with a very long list that I could go into great lengths of time to describe to him, as compiled by the Tyee 5 years ago. It was entitled Harper, Serial Abuser of Power, and 70 occasions in which that Conservative crew offended democracy and offended Canadians. Shall we ask for apologies from them too?
First of all, I do want to correct. I said Fleetwood Kills. It's Fleetwood Port Kills. I do apologize. The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I think that can be answered quite simply. There is one Prime Minister in this country's history that has been found guilty of the Conflict of Interest Act, and I can assure you that is not a Conservative Prime Minister. It is that Liberal Prime Minister that sits across the way and self-aggrandizes each and every day and is eroding the trust that Canadians have within this place, and it is for shame that there has not been appropriate consequences accordingly.
Questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Laurentides-les-Belles. Yes, I have a question for my colleague, given that we all want to help communities get by, and also given that he is a human being. When things are going well, we don't try to change things, and then when things are going badly, and that's when we take the bull by the horns and try to redo everything. And what is preventing us from not shedding light on conflicts of interest in the government, while also making changes to help our fellow citizens in the pandemic? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the question, and she's absolutely right. We should be dealing with both, and that's exactly what we're doing. And you know what would have been great? Had we been doing this for the last number of weeks. Had the concern that the Liberals, in typical Liberal fashion, they'll shut everything down, say that there's an emergency, and then because they've shut everything down at the last minute, they come up with some miraculous solution and then have to ram it through with no regard for the process, no regard for constructive feedback that could be given. They just ram it through. They manufacture these circumstances so that they can use urgency for their own political ends. Well, Madam Chair, Madam Speaker, Canadians deserve better. And we are seized in this place today with a number of very important issues, including help that Canadians need, but also the fact that we need to stop the erosion of trust that is taking place within our institutions of Parliament, and that's what this motion is about.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
You know, for the last couple of hours, we've now watched Liberals and Conservatives point fingers at each other. And before I sound like Mercutio and call for a pox on both their houses, let me just say this. I believe that the member should be careful, for those who live in glass houses should not be the ones to throw stones. And he did evade the question from my Liberal colleague previously. This motion does not have anything to do with the Prime Minister. It has to do with a former Liberal MP. So on that vein, would my honourable colleague submit to accepting this motion to be expanded to look into former Conservative MPs Dean Del Mastro or Rob Anders if he's found guilty of evading taxes?
The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
So thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And every member of this House is subject to the Conflict of Interest Act, and every member of this House should be expected to be held to those high standards. So absolutely any violation needs to be held to the same standards so that we can do exactly what I referred to in my speech. Repair the erosion of trust that's taken place within the institution of Parliament. to ensure that Canadians can in fact trust their members, the members of Parliament from coast to coast to coast, to do what is best and act in a way that Canadians expect us to.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to speak today. I think this is my first opportunity to speak in the virtual Parliament, and I'll have to say I'm disappointed that I'm speaking on this motion, because like my colleagues across the way and in my own party, I've been meeting with constituents on a daily basis, hearing about how their businesses are struggling, how they don't know if they're going to make the mortgage or pay rent, put food on their table, hearing from local charities that things are tough, donations aren't coming in anymore, trying to find a way to make that up, that affordable housing isn't getting better in our riding and in Niagara, despite the fact that people are struggling. Housing prices are still going up, but we're not seeing the associated jobs that come with it. That we're seeing an opioid crisis that continues to rage on. And I'm worried, the previous member, I believe it was the honourable member from Battle River Crowfoot, pounded his hands on the desk saying we need to help Canadians and we need to deal with the issues. But what he said, there's one point that I was concerned, and I'm worried it reflects the views of his party, because I believe I heard another member say it in this debate, that the Liberals will stand up and say that there's an emergency. So it's truly unfortunate that the Conservatives don't believe that there's an emergency. And this motion reflects a lack of seriousness that they have for the crisis that Canadians are facing. A crisis that has seen 9,000 Canadians die, that has affected members of this House, has affected the leader of the Conservative Party, the leader of the Bloc Québécois. Other politicians across the way in different provinces are in confinement. I know colleagues of my own have suffered through this illness. Their families, their friends. We all know someone who's been affected, who's lost a loved one. We've seen the Army go into long-term care facilities in this country because of the devastating crisis. And to make the allegation in this place that we're saying that there's a crisis, that we're inventing this as some reason to ram through legislation, is unconscionable. Canadians expect us to work together. And I think Canadians have a lot to be proud of. They've seen premiers and the Prime Minister of all political stripes, Conservative, Liberal, NDP, and Quebec, Premier of Quebec, working together in this crisis. And we're not always going to agree, and we shouldn't always agree. That's not what this place is about. This is a place for debate. As the honourable member from Alpac stated, there's good ideas on all sides, but let's debate that. I've been hearing from members of the Conservative Party that we need to be debating issues like unemployment. We need to be getting people back to work, looking after their businesses, helping out. And what have they deemed the priority issue for today when the government is bringing forward the legislation to help Canadians? It is this motion that I think my constituents would be embarrassed that this is the priority, that this is what we're debating, not how we can help them, not how we can bring relief to them, how we can continue ensuring that they're able to pay the rent, they're able to put food on their tables. I know the leader of the opposition tweeted out that the Liberals were going to cancel CERB, but it's being replaced, and that's what we're talking about today, or at least we should be. But the Conservatives wish to discuss a former Liberal member of Parliament and ethical violations. That is their priority. Even though there will be plenty of time, committees will meet again, there will be plenty of opportunity for the Ethics Committee to deal with this if they deem this to be their priority. And I saw another honourable member bring up this fact, but if we're talking about former members of Parliament, I haven't heard the Conservatives bring up Rob Anders and what we've learned today about tax evasion. A member who for years railed against the CRA and the work they were doing. And we don't see that level of priority. We see a lack of seriousness. They see an opportunity to play some political games, to delay this debate, I don't know what the end goal is, Madam Speaker. It's truly unfortunate. My constituents, our constituents, the people of Canada want us working towards solutions. Do they want the opposition to hold the government to account? Absolutely. Absolutely they do. But in bringing forward a motion on a former member of Parliament to delay debate on a serious discussion about bringing relief, immediate relief to Canadians, should shock their conscience. It should shock the conscience of members of the Conservative Party that we're picking up where we left off during the pandemic. And again, I keep coming back to this because it really impacted me so much when the honourable member from Battle River Crowfoot suggested that there wasn't a crisis. And again, this motion shows that. This motion shows the lack of seriousness for, and I'll say, the federal Conservatives. We see in Ontario, we see across the country, provincial Conservatives understanding and provincial Conservative governments understanding there is a crisis and there is a need for help, there is a need for assistance, that there's a time to put these types of partisan games aside. And this is this moment. But here we are, Madam Speaker. And we really do need to get back to this crisis. It is true that this is the greatest crisis we have faced as a nation since the Second World War. The economy has been dramatically impacted. Again, 9,000 Canadians have died. We are in the midst of a second wave of this pandemic. I want to be there, Madam Speaker, but I'm home because of agreements between the parties, because it is too dangerous for us to all gather together. There is a crisis. Parliament hasn't seen anything like this. Canadians in their lifetime haven't seen anything like this. They want us to be debating help for them, not some Conservative talking points to move forward, to grab a cheap political shot, to try to get, I don't know. And again, Madam Speaker, I am at a loss. I know members of the Liberal Party are anxious to debate the legislation that is proposed to help Canadians. And as another member mentioned, that there are changes that need to be made. And I'll give credit to the, I've been mentioning a few times, the honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot did say there are opportunities for changes to be made. He mentioned the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy and how it was changed, because we've heard from businesses, we heard from the opposition, and changes need to be made. But this is the place. This is the place to do that, to debate those ideas. There will be a time for partisan fights. There will be a time for committees to meet. They will be ramping up again. But again, Madam Speaker, what Canadians want to hear from their elected representatives is, how are you going to help me? How are we going to get to a vaccine? How are you going to get my business through? How am I going to pay the rent? But no, Madam Speaker, what we're stuck debating again is a former member of Parliament. And I'm at a loss. And I think, I hope the Conservatives aren't playing on the cynicism of Canadians, that they won't be paying too much attention to this. and they can just post a few angry rage videos on Facebook that show that they've stood up. But what they've done, they haven't stood up for Canadians, Madam Speaker. I only see you, Madam Speaker, as a small picture on my screen. Am I out of time? Well, then I thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. The member for St. Catharines talked about a lack of seriousness. Well, I'll tell you, Madam Speaker, what the official opposition finds serious. It's the work that this House should have been doing for the last 6 weeks when the Liberal Prime Minister slammed the door on Parliament, slammed the door on democracy, and locked committee rooms. That's what's unconscionable. So, you know, when we wanted to do work over the last 6 weeks, not when this benefit was set to end, but to have debates, to have discussions about it, not wait till the 11th hour and call that an emergency. We obviously recognize the seriousness of the pandemic, but the business of holding the government to account goes on, and so do liberal scandals that happen regularly. It is unfortunate that you want to conflate, Madam Speaker, that the member, through you, wants to conflate different sets of rules. But the Conflict of Interest Code and the Conflict of Interest Act are what we're discussing here today, not other issues. And so my question through you, Madam Speaker, to the member is, was the 6-week cover-up prorogation the best that your government can do for Canadians?
Remind the member that he's to address the questions and comments to the chair. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank the honourable member for his question. And I think he's referring to also the 2 days of time for debate that was lost during this prorogation. But it's interesting to hear the Conservatives complain on one side that we've lost 2 days of debate and we're going to make up for that by wasting a lot more time, by not talking about the issues. So there is a lack of seriousness, Madam Speaker, from the members of the opposition, because if they were truly serious about making up for lost time, we wouldn't be debating this, that we would be talking about the issues that matter most to Canadians, and it's not about a former member of Parliament.
Questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Jonquière. While listening to my colleague, I had a bad taste in my mouth because I feel like I need to defend my Conservative colleagues. To say that there's a lack of seriousness, it's a political game. That is what the motion is doing today. That's a bit hypocritical, I think. Why is it hypocritical? Because throughout this presentation, my colleague talked about debating. Well, what does that mean, debate? I feel like he doesn't grasp the subtleties of debate. Debate is done in pairs of two. So it means that we need to set aside our apprehensions to find a type of consensus. And I'm wondering why the Liberals did not quickly accept to sign on to the motion and show proof that they are sensitive to the matter, and they could have saved us all this time. So why did my colleague not support the motion quickly and move on to another debate? That is the question that I would ask him.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, I know you're waiting probably for the translation to finish.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Again, we're locked into 2 hours of debate here, Madam Speaker, in debate, and perhaps something was lost a bit in translation. I didn't quite understand the question from the honourable member about this not being debate. But again, Canadians want us debating or talking about issues that matter, and to be locked into this debate for 2 hours takes away from the discussion that could be had. And I don't think that any of the members on the other side of the House are going to put these speeches and this debate into their householder, because Canadians, again, want us talking about the issues that matter to them, putting food on their table, helping them out, and getting them through a crisis, even though members of the Conservatives will say that there isn't a crisis. This is truly unfortunate, this entire debate.
Resuming debate, reprise de débat. The honourable member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Yeah, it's always an honor to be able to rise in the House of Commons. It is great to be able to return to Ottawa to represent the constituents of the great area of southwestern Saskatchewan. And I want to thank my honourable colleague from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes, who serves as our Shadow Minister for Ethics, for bringing forward this very important motion. It's a shame that did not come from the leaders or members of the Liberal caucus at this time. We've heard from several senior Liberal members who quite frankly, I think ethics really does matter to them, and they would have had a great opportunity to show that they take it seriously. I'm disappointed that we have to also consider and discuss the misconduct of one of our former colleagues, the member for Steveston Richmond East in the last Parliament. It's something that we have to address if we are to maintain any integrity as an institution and show respect to all of the people who sent us here. As it says in the text of the motion, the actions of this member have, and I quote, cast unacceptable reflections upon the House and its members, amount to an offence against the dignity and the authority of the House, and warrant sanction. So it's especially disappointing to consider it as a member of Parliament in my first term. I believe that we have the ability and opportunity to make a difference for our fellow citizens, which is why I am here. So I just want to touch briefly again on that very point. As a new member of Parliament, again, we have several senior members who are trying to skirt debate about ethics and about the importance that it plays as our role as parliamentarians. And in the last speech that we heard, or actually it was in questions to one of my colleagues that spoke from Battle River Crowfoot, was talking about whether we take this emergency serious or not. Ultimately, proroguing Parliament proved that the government doesn't take it seriously because we had the time to actually debate the help that Canadians need and deserve to get through an emergency. But instead, that 6 weeks was completely lost to play political games. So much for the Team Canada approach that we quite often keep hearing from this government. So again, going back to being a newly elected member of Parliament, I'm looking at members from all parties. Just looking to see what the example is that's being set. And there's a huge, long list from the government. Again, Canadians are looking to the government to set the tone, to set the example as to what the standards should be for citizens in our great country. So, there's all the different reports. We've got the Trudeau report, number 1.
Mention first or last names of anybody who sits in the House, and I would just ask him to refer to the titles instead. L'honorable député de...
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent, point of order. With all due respect to the speakership, we have a contrary opinion, given that this is a document. The title of the document can be cited as is in the House of Commons, be it Report 1 or 2, which is called Trudeau 1 or Trudeau 2. It's not our fault if that's the name of the Prime Minister. Well, we can't do this kind of thing indirectly or directly. We have to do that together. So I will make a ruling on this. I will follow up, but usually we can't do directly what we can do indirectly.
Now the member to continue. The honourable member for Cypress Hills Grassland.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'll just take the liberty to apologize right now for that. So we'll just refer to it as the Prime Minister's report. We'll use that for going forward here. So Prime Minister's report number 1 from the Aga Khan. So no Minister of the Crown, Minister of State or Parliamentary Secretary, no member of his or her family, and no ministerial advisor or ministerial staff shall accept travel on non-commercial charter private aircraft for any purpose unless required in his or her capacity as a public office holder or in exceptional circumstances or with the prior approval of the Commissioner. So it's very easily laid out. The Prime Minister chose to ignore that and is found guilty. So we move on to the Prime Minister report number 2, which was involved with SNC Lavalin. The report concluded that Prime Minister Trudeau violated the Prime Minister violated Section 9 of the Conflict of Interest Act. The report was simply titled Prime Minister to report, as it was his second violation, setting quite the tone for the people of Canada. Then we can keep moving on through other members of his cabinet. We have the clam scam report, we'll call it that for lack of a better term, where the violated conflict of interest laws when it was awarded a contract to a company where the wife's cousin had significant influence. Again, setting the tone for Canadians. Next up, the former finance minister. We have Morneau report number 1 with the French villa. He merely only had to pay a $200 fine. Just recently, we found out again. Now we have Morneau report number 2 for violating the, when he was campaigning, he was found in contravention of the Elections Act. What was the consequences for that? It was merely a $300 fine. $500 so far total. And he's implied in a third scandal, as we know, it is ongoing, which as many of us here in this House suspect is the reason why Parliament was prorogued by this government. It also, we're waiting on Prime Minister report number 3, which we're all certain will be coming from this very same scandal. Once again, why was Parliament prorogued? To avoid further scrutiny. That's the way it seems. That's the way that Canadians are perceiving this as well. When we talk about hearing from our constituents, yes, they are all absolutely concerned about the emergency situation that we find ourselves in. But when we talk about the national unity issue that we face here in this country, one of the main concerns, one of the main objectives that Western Canadians see that this government is undertaking that is undermining the institutions that we have in this country. It is the ethics breaches, the ethics violations that continue to come. And again, it's starting at the very top. It didn't take very long in the Prime Minister's mandate to be convicted and charged with his very first ethics violation. Then we had number 2, and we're awaiting report number 3. This is a systemic issue within the government, starting from the top, filtering its way down. We're talking here today on a motion about a former member who is not in the cabinet, so it has made its way from the top all the way down through all different levels of the government. So, what are we going to do as parliamentarians to uphold ethics? The whole notion of the system that we have as honourable members is that we would do the right and honourable thing when we are found guilty of these types of breaches and violations. And in particular, the noble thing would be for people to step down. We are serving in public. The public demands and expects the utmost from us as members. We should be held to a higher standard than people who are not in public life. One other point that I'd like to make to kind of emphasize that, when we look at the Elections Act, if a financial agent makes a simple mistake on a campaign return, they're threatened with jail time. But yet when we look at the Morneau report number 2, he had a $300 fine. Big whoop. $300. We need to make sure that we have some actual teeth in our ethics laws, that it actually would dissuade people. Just merely being named and shamed, as we talked about earlier, obviously isn't doing it enough. A $300 fine for a second breach. What's going to happen if there's a third report that ever comes out? Will it be $400? I don't know. When we look at the history of it going from 200 to 300, one can just assume that that's the direction that it's going to go. So when we're talking about what we're here to talk about today with the motion, I just wanted to bring up the point where this is another quote from the Commissioner's report. And I quote, "Where I conclude that a member has contravened the code and I find no mitigating circumstances, as was the case in this inquiry, I may recommend a sanction for the House to impose on the contravening member. However, in the present case, given that Mr. Pesciolito is no longer a member and therefore not subject to the rules governing members of the House of Commons, issuing such a recommendation would serve no purpose." So, if as members of the House of Commons, if we are not going to take it upon ourselves to ensure that ethics standards are upheld to the highest degree, whether you're in Parliament or not, we need to make sure that we are doing something. That's what we're striving to do here today. Our constituents, especially in Western Canada. They're bringing this issue up. This is an issue that pertains to national unity. We need to ensure that all members of government are going to be holding ethics in the highest standards that they possibly can, because that is what our constituents demand from us. So going back to the issues that we have, going from the top down, I mean, again, you know, the finance minister held a pretty high portfolio. He's one of the top government cabinet ministers, right? So I have to wonder right now if the most recent cases with the former finance minister will turn out to be similar to the case in front of us here today. Are we going to be discussing this further on down the road? I don't know. Are we going to continue to see what happens with the We Charity scandal? I don't know. Again, the government prorogued Parliament to get rid of scrutiny that we were digging up on the government. Just wondering, where is that ever going to take us? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So we're up to time.
The time provided for this debate on the concurrence debate called the Pesquisalito report. It is my duty to put this to the vote. The question is as follows.
Mr. Barrett, seconded by Mr. Deltel, moved that the House, A, concur in the report of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, entitled, shall I dispense? Entitled Pesquisalito Report, tabled on Wednesday, February 5th, 2020, and thank him for his work. B, decide.
B, resolve that Joe Pesquisalito's 10 breaches of the Conflict of Interest Code for members of the House of Commons cast unacceptable reflections upon the House and its members, amount to an offence against the dignity and authority of the House and warrant sanction.
Joe Pesquisalito, former member of the House of Commons, to provide no later than the 15th sitting day, following the adoption of this order, a written apology to the House in respect of his breaches of the Code by way of a letter addressed to the Speaker, provided that the Speaker shall, at the conclusion of oral questions next following its receipt, read it to the House and lay it upon the table. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Pursuant to an order made Wednesday, c'est un nouveau processus pour.
This is a new process for votes by yea or nay. So, we ask for your patience. I heard that there were some yeas and some nays. Pursuant to the order adopted on Wednesday, the 23rd of September 2020, we will not proceed to a such vote.
I see the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to defer the vote.
En conséquence.
Consequently.
Okay. So pursuant to an order made on Wednesday, September 23rd, the division stands deferred until later this day at the expiry of the time provided for oral questions. Now we'll go to call pour votre patience.
Thank you for your patience. This is a whole new process for us, so it takes us a bit of time to make sure that we are very precise, so we appreciate your patience.
Continuing with the routine proceedings for today, presenting petitions. Présentation de pétitions. The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honour to rise in this House on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Nation to present a petition To the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development, from many petitioners across Canada, this relates to something that touches all of our constituencies, and that is, of course, parents dealing with COVID, trying to take care of their kids, and particularly parents who are on maternity or parental leave and who have had to be in lockdown, missing important social opportunities, bonding opportunities for their children that are crucial for early childhood development. And also for those who are currently on leave and have missed out on having support from family and friends and grandparents, also due to COVID. So the petitioners ask that the minister extend paid maternity or parental leave.
Some breaking news from Thomson Reuters. Thomson Reuters, one of the best in the world news. So Unifor local leadership approves a tentative deal with Ford in Canada. This is fresh on Sunday news out of Reuters. So the local union leadership in Canada across all Ford Motor Company locals in both trades and production approved a tentative deal reached between Unifor and the company. This union just said, as I said, on Sunday today here. Ford will invest $1.95 billion in its Oakville and Windsor plant in Canada as part of its tentative deal with Canada Auto Workers that announced last week. So there's that tentative deal, but now we're signed, sealed, and it's delivered, it looks like. The federal government, along with the Ontario government, is willing to invest in turning the Oakville plant over to production of electric vehicles, an investment that could keep the facility open for years, decades. A government source confirmed that on Tuesday, so ratification meetings are being held on Sunday to consider the tentative deal agreement details, and vote results will be made available on Monday, the union said in a statement. So there's the Canadian dollars 1213384. So this is reporting by Radhika Animekar and editing by Bengaluru. Of course, editor is Lisa Shoemaker. Leave your comments below. This is a great deal. Electric vehicles, okay, it's going along with the green thing the Liberals were saying, but it's a Ford Motor Company. Outstanding job. Have a good day.